to the Humans of Nature podcast, where we uncover the untold stories of our planet's delicate ecosystem and the remarkable individuals driving global change. I'm your host, Cassandra.
And I'm Ritakra.
And today we delve into the inspiring journey of Ziyaan, an advocate and change maker who has created social impact around the world. From his involvement in the Climate Cardinals that translates climate information to founding for the Menstruator, Ziyaan has been at the forefront of transformative action. Join us as we gain valuable insight on building a more equitable and sustainable world. So, Ziyaan, you've given a brief introduction about you. Is there anything else that we missed that you might want to add on?
No, that was a great intro. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be on the podcast and share a little bit of my experiences in the social impact space. I would just add, I've worked with a lot of organizations in climate, health, poverty, education. It's been 6 years now since I've served in the social impact space, and every day I learn and grow more about the space. And yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation.
Hey, thank you for joining us. So let's dive right into our first question. So as an advocate for creating social impact and aiming to impact 1 billion lives around the world, how do you believe addressing issues like menstrual equity and climate change align with the goals of World Population Day? In what ways do these issues intersect with global population dynamics?
Interesting. That's definitely a very loaded question. So population dynamics, and World Population Day and how that intersects with some of my work. I would say working in all these different spaces, you definitely get to see some of the inequities that lie in different parts of the world, right? And so, when you look at population dynamics, um, I guess what you can say is, South Asia is one of the most like populated regions in the world. Africa has like 1 billion people, and in some of my work on ground, you start realizing, especially working in all these different geographies, um, how inequitable things are, and so in an ideal world, we'd obviously like to see a world where everyone has access to basic resources, right? And has access to basic needs. However, in some developing countries, especially in the West and the North, you get to see that a very small number of people have access to way more resources than they even need than a large group of people, such as in South Asia and East Africa. Yeah, and so maybe just giving an example, in some of my work in the climate space, I think the biggest realization has been understanding that the people most vulnerable to climate change and the effects of it, don't even know the effects of climate change. And so when I worked with Climate Cardinals, an issue we were trying to address is this issue of not having access to climate education resources. Unfortunately, primarily all the climate information that's out there in the world is only available in the UN 6 to 7 main languages. And there's thousands of languages around the world. And what happens is people most vulnerable to the effects of it don't even know about the effects because there's no education resources available in their local languages. And so how they even meant to understand some of the effects, right? And I think this has a huge role to play in terms of just how some of these intergovernmental organizations are set up, the flow of funding that comes from countries like the US, and Canada going into countries like South Asia, and the dependency syndrome that's created based off of it. And so there's definitely a lot to unpack there, but yeah, I'll stop at that point.
Now, you mentioned your work with Climate Cardinals involving to translate climate information into multiple, like various different languages, and you want to make it more accessible. So, how is it important to bridge these language barriers and addressing global issues like climate change, especially considering the diversity of the world's population?
Yeah, I think just building on top of that, I think it's really important because, again, people most vulnerable to climate change need to know how to deal with some of the consequences of it, right? And these are some of the most marginalized populations that don't even have access to their basic needs. And so a great starting point is educating them on it and thinking about how that we can make this education accessible from a very grassroots level, and then kind of building on top of that. I'll give you a story, I guess. So when during COVID, one of the projects I was doing on a personal level is I carried out this beach cleanup back in Tanzania. And a whole group was meant to come. It was a public holiday, and we were meant to do this cleanup, but no one ended up showing up apart from my mom and I. And so we decided to still go on and start doing this cleanup. And as we were starting to clean up the beach, a lot of local residents were sort of laughing at us, and they're like, "Who are these like two random people, cleaning up our beach? Like, why are they doing this, right?" And so a lot of local residents were sort of laughing at us, and then two of them decided to actually join us and help us out. And so we spent a couple hours doing the cleanup. And then after the cleanup, I started talking to some of those two local people that started helping me. And I asked them, why is it that you helped us? And they're like, we really just wanted to help because we saw you guys coming from outside trying to clean our space. We really just wanted to help, and it's weird that everyone else was laughing. And then as we go on with that conversation, I started talking to them about climate change and what they know about it. And um when I did mention climate change, that was the first time that they even knew what it was, right? And it was even hard for me to translate into Swahili, which is the local language in Tanzania, because there's no vocabulary like even available to like fully explain some of the effects. And so as I started explaining to them, they were so shocked that something that's global and it's gonna affect them the most, especially in the coastal region. Um, they didn't know anything about it, and I was so surprised by 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 the fact that and when I came across climate cardinals, um, I was like, you know what, like as we got deeper into this issue, we realized that the education resources out there aren't even available in these local languages, and so how do you how are they meant to even know about any of these issues when it's not part of local school curriculums, it's not part of issues talked about, and there's no resources available in the local languages.
Yeah, it's like it's clear to see that some communities aren't educated, and so it's important to explain to them. And it's surprising that they didn't even know about climate change. And as you mentioned, it's not really in the school curriculum to talk about it. And you've done like so many things like this, and you've been recognized for your work in creating social change, including like receiving awards like the Princess Diana Award and being named a global teen leader. So how do you see the efforts of young change makers like yourself contributing to global changes addressed on World Population Day?
Yeah, I think young people, we all have an extremely important role to play. And we're at the forefront of all these movements these days, right? And you see from climate to health to education to poverty, mental health, it's young people leading the way, including you folks, right? And I think what truly brings us or the true advantage that we have is we see a world through a new lens, and we are going to be the ones that are going to be affected most on these different issues, right? And this is the world that we're going to be living in for the longest amount of time. And so thinking about how is it that we can shape that world, no matter what our age is or background is or race is, how do we come together and um, talk about things that usually aren't talked about, right? And bring our fresh perspectives onto the table, and really just rally and come together. Like I think we have strong power in terms of organizing and coming together as a generation, and then also the advantages that we have in terms of you know um the access to social media that we have, the access to all the different technologies that we have, and the time to organize and advocate, right? Like a lot of us are in school, don't have a lot of responsibilities, and so I always think of that as an advantage, the fact that we have uh really, like when I started off, I mean, I was 15 years old and I was just in high school, and had nothing to lose, right? And so just really advocating and fighting for causes that matter to us, and talking about things that we usually don't talk about. I usually say young people are not the leaders of tomorrow, but we're the leaders of today, right? And truly believing in the power of now and the power of starting today.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing on that. And also, you were a recipient of the Karen McKillen International Leader of Tomorrow Award. And how has your scholarship and education at the Sauder School of Business helped shape your understanding of interconnectedness between social impact, business, and addressing global challenges?
Yeah, and so it's been 6 years since I've been in the space, right? And I started off in menstrual health, started off as a school project, and then eventually launched that and turned that into an organization, and managed to grow and scale that to, helping 20,000 people in 10 countries with a team of over 150 plus volunteers. And I think as through that, I got a lot of opportunities to work with a whole range of organizations. And through my experiences, like I started realizing that a lot of these issues are so intersectional, as you mentioned, and are so really that there's a systems play here. And I've started developing my own theory of change, and my theory of change suggests that in order for us to truly make a systematic impact, it's important for us to involve all stakeholders in an economy. And so you see a lot of nonprofits working in their own vacuums and their own spaces, and are sort of in their own, like, have that tunnel vision of doing things on themselves. But for me, recently, I've really started just focusing on how is it that we can involve all stakeholders in an economy. And so how do we come to a table and involve, you know, everyone from businesses to nonprofits to governments to educational institutions to media to young people, and how do we all come together and put and truly make that systematic level change in our own separate industries, but also do stuff together. And so I think my education has really helped me come to that understanding and acknowledgement. And also always just learning and developing and growing. And so right now, I'm doing a business degree at Sauder School of Business, as you mentioned, and I've truly started understanding how business can be used as a form, and as a way and as a tool to make social impact. And so right now, I'm actually working on a startup that's not public yet, but we're primarily trying to address the systematic issue of sustainable sources of funding for nonprofits and organizations. And we're spending a lot of time to think about how is it that we can use technology as a way to address this issue around sustainable sources of funding. And so I think that in itself is such a good example of how is it that we can involve different stakeholders in the economy to make a difference.
Yeah, you spent like a lot of time like sharing the knowledge that you know about climate change and telling it to like other communities who aren't very much educated in this type of like field. So like as a public speaker, you've had the opportunity to share your experiences and inspire others at various events and conferences worldwide. How do you believe storytelling and personal narratives can help raise awareness and drive action on World Population Day, specifically in relation to issues such as sustainable development?
Yeah, I think the way I look at storytelling as an effective tool is, you see, for like the human, like nature and our involvement, like we've been in existence for like decades and centuries, right? And for the longest amount of time, we never used to document. We never had books or never had like um uh stuff documented in a physical form. And so you see a lot of the traditions that we have today. How is it that all this knowledge has passed on over generations when you never had books or never had anything to document? And what you see in all the different cultures and how humans have evolved, what has stayed true is the stories, right? Stories of people. Even if you look at like religious scripts, like what's really stayed is storytelling. And as humans, that is what we connect to. I could give you a whole lecture about the most random topic, right? And but what you will remember is that feeling and that emotion and the stories that I share with you. And I think that's the power of storytelling. It's things that as humans that we connect to. And so when we are advocating and we are doing the work that we're doing, in no matter what space, it's important that we share stories, stories of, some of the successes of our work, stories of challenges and how trivial it is. I gave you this example of the beach cleanup that we did, right? And I'm sure from this whole conversation, that's something that's probably gonna stick to most people. And so I think it's extremely important and powerful that we continue to share stories and use platforms like podcasting, like public speaking, like going to conferences, to share stories with, using social media as a form for storytelling. Um, and I encourage other advocates to do the same too.
We totally agree with you. And for people who want to follow in your footsteps, what advice would you give to them and who want to make a difference and create a social impact on a larger scale?
Yeah, so I usually prefer not to give advice because I think everyone's in a different situation, and for me to give advice to someone, I've truly needed to like spend time with them to understand their context. And so instead of sharing advice, what I would share is maybe some like golden nuggets or frameworks that I think it's extremely important, that has been helpful in my journey. And so one, I would say, if you do have an idea, or if you do want to start off something or already doing what you're doing. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it again. Um, we're not only leaders of tomorrow, we're leaders of today, right? And my grade three teacher used to tell me when I used to submit my homework late, I used to tell her I'm going to submit it tomorrow, and she would tell me tomorrow never comes. And that's really stuck with me until today because I truly think that if you do have an idea, start today. Like truly, tomorrow will never come, right? And just bring it to life and document it. Literally, if you have an idea, just put it down on paper, and that's already you, starting to work towards it. Second thing I would say is I've always emphasized, and one of my favorite quotes says, "The energy is in the purpose, not the plan." And so I encourage each and every person to really take time to figure out what is their own purpose in this life, right? And what is it that they're trying to achieve? And what is the legacy that they want to leave behind, when they're on their deathbed, right? What is it that they want to be remembered for? And I recommend looking into this framework, a Japanese concept called ikigai, that I've touched on earlier. Um, I think it's a great tool to figure out what that purpose is for you. And starting off there, I think is a really great starting point. And then lastly, honestly, like don't be too hard on yourself. Like we live in a time where I feel like everything's like super polarized. There's so much going on in the news. There's all these issues. There's a lot of climate anxiety. Mental health rates are at its worst. And so truly thinking about what matters to people, and focusing on things that do matter, and sort of shutting out the noise, as you go through your journey, and don't be too hard on yourself.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like a lot of people need to hear that, especially the ones that want to start up and advocate for global issues and stuff. So, do you have any future like projects, activities, or events or books you want to talk about and share?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot that's on my mind more recently. So I did talk about this new startup I'm working on. The startup I'm working on is basically a platform that uses like our big vision is to make this world a kinder place, one transaction at a time. And I want to create a world in which you can go about your day-to-day purchases and your day-to-day life, and whilst you're doing that, be making an impact as well. And so what our platform does is we're trying to create um, a tool that basically uses your everyday purchases, and you're able to round up your spare change on every transaction that you make, and then also get cashback rewards, that you can donate to causes of your choice. And so you will hear about it more as we go through. We're still super early days, but I recommend people like checking us out on social media, following that journey. And in terms of other things that's on my mind, I do run a podcast to called Leaders of Today. And we're on a mission to empower young people to start and continue their advocacy work. And not only advocacy work, but like just achieve their missions and purpose. And so spend a lot of time having conversations with people that have done it all, similar to you guys. And thinking about how that we can provide resources and opportunities for them to continue some of their work. And so recommend checking that out too, if anyone's interested.
All right, thank you so much. We'll definitely have your stuff linked on our website when we post on World Population Day, your podcast, and your organization. And before closing remarks, do you have anything else you would like to add for our listeners?
I would say, first of all, just thank you for having me on this platform. Super grateful to be on here. I recommend you guys to check out some of your work. And for this podcast, if anyone's listening to this point, definitely leave a review. And follow and share on your social media platforms. It's very helpful for anyone that's podcasting. So please do that for um the both of you guys.
Thank you again so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So, in closing, we want to recognize Ziyaan's remarkable commitment to sustainability and eco-friendliness. For the Menstruator, Ziyaan promotes the use of reusable and eco-friendly menstrual products, advocating for reduced waste and a more sustainable approach to menstrual health. His involvement with Climate Cardinals, where he translates climate information, bridges language barriers, and empowers individuals worldwide to make sustainable choices.
And his work embodies the values of environmental conservation and underscores the importance of taking small steps towards a greener future. We hope his inspiring journey has shed light on the power of youth-driven change in building a sustainable and equitable world. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the YG podcast as we continue to explore global issues and promote sustainable solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.